Digital audio health by Simatrax.
Welcome to the Rhonda Grant Show with your host, Rhonda Grant. If you believe that there is more to life than what you see right now, and you want to find out more, listen in as her guests share their journey and their extraordinary experiences. Now, here is your host, Rhonda Grant.
Welcome to the Rhonda Grant Show. Sometimes the universe has a way of placing people or obstacles in your path to help guide and direct you on your mission. Listen in as we discover the path my guest has traveled. Have they been inspired by a calling, crafted their journey, or a bit of both? I invite you to embrace the conversations and to use them to help you to recognize if this is happening in your life. Our guest today is Gail Hayssen. Gail has had paranormal experiences since she was a teenager. Today, in the research community, Gail is known as a telepath, psychic, and remote viewer, someone who accurately sees distance or future events. The chapter on telepathy in Dr. Dean Radin's international bestseller, Supernormal, describes one of the many successful paranormal experiences with Gail as the subject. Gail attended Woodstock Music Festival in 1969, appears in the Woodstock documentary, and is featured in the recent book, 50 Years of Piece of Music. She has contributed to many experiments and papers on paranormal phenomena. Gail has been welcomed into indigenous cultures, including the Huichol of Mexico and Haida of Alaska and Shamans of Mongolia. She has led an unconventional life and found herself accepted into other cultures by just being herself. Welcome to the Rhonda Grant Show, Gail. It's so nice to be interviewing you.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you. So my first question is, what was your first memory of having telepathy? Can you remember how old you were?
I can't, because when I was young, the things that happened to me were more of I would leave my body and like travel around my house as a child and see everyone else sleeping.
Wow.
Above everyone. And I would call it flying. So I would be flying around the house.
Yes.
So that I can't call that telepathy, but it's my first memories of doing things that were not what I would consider of the ordinary.
Right. No, that wouldn't be ordinary.
No, and that was very comforting to me. It wasn't like a scary experience as a child, and it's something that I thought everybody did, but found out everybody doesn't do that. But as I got older and became a teenager, I found that I could actually take this flying ability, as I told you, I called flying, and go further from my home. And I could go above the house, and I could go down the street, and I could go above the city. And by the time I was in my 20s, I found I could go, above California, or, really, really see from a distance, but not actually have my body with me at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I experienced a lot when I was young, which also doesn't fit in with telepathy, is more of a knowingness, and this has to do centered around death, where I would just have a knowingness. Even, I would look at, there was an instance where I looked at my grandfather, and I think I was about 15 or so, and I just knew he was going to die now, but he was on his way to work and perfectly healthy. But within 2 weeks, he was in the hospital and, died, a couple of weeks after, died in the hospital. So there were things like that where I would know things that were going to happen. And then I had a lot of dreams as a child that I don't think I understood as well as I did later on in life, what those dreams might have had meant to do with things that had happened in my childhood. There were those sort of things. And then by the time I was 15, I was already doing medical diagnosis in San Francisco. And so that's not really a telepathy, but it's where I'm given the name and the age and the city that a person is in. I've never met the person, but someone who knows that person is in the audience, who's written down the sicknesses of the person. And I would describe what their sicknesses were. And the more that I did that, because I did it for almost 2 years, the more that I did it, I got into incredible details. Like I could see the room they were sitting in, the house that they had. It wouldn't just be, whether they had, emphysema.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more information would come the more that I did them.
Right.
Really, up until 15, the kinds of things that I did. In telepathy, it might have been there were times that I would maybe be with friends where I might know something they were going to say before they said it or something like that, but nothing that I would have any memory of that was so astonishing or anything.
Mm-hmm. So when you say that you would leave your body and you would travel around the rooms and check and make sure that your family was there or whatever you were doing, that is remote viewing, or the other word for that is called clairvoyance, is it?
Well, actually, I'm not sure if this is called astral travel. I really,
okay.
I never learned the word remote viewing until I met Dean Radin and Russell. I had never heard that word.
Me either. Yes.
Described what was happening when you were doing medical diagnosis. You were going to find someone's body in a different place and see what was wrong with them. So you were remotely viewing someone else.
Okay.
But I had never thought of it that way, but that's really what part of that training really was seeing something in a different location than where you were.
Yes. And did you grow up with people around you that had these abilities as well, that you spoke to and could talk about what you were seeing or feeling?
Well, my grandma Schneider lived in our house with us, and she was from Branks, Poland. And she, as my father used to say, was a very spiritual woman.
Yes.
And I think she learned to read and write English very late in life. She came to Ellis Island, to this country, when she was 18, I think, something like that. So she had grown up in during the World War I in Poland. So she had suffered a lot of different experiences. And the one thing that she shared with me, which I think was the beginning of her spiritual journey as a young teenager, was she had survived typhoid fever.
Yes.
And her sister, or I'm not sure who, one of her family members died in the bed near her, and she was expecting to die also. But instead, and this is story she shared with her broken English as a child.
Yes.
So that planted in my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And she would say that the way she described it is that she was rising above her body, and the fevers were so high, and she was going up. And then all of a sudden something happened, and she was plunged right back down into the body.
Yes.
And then she survived, and the fever broke, and she survived typhoid fever, which is not, it's a hard suffering to go through. Most people died.
Right.
She experienced that. And so as a grown woman, when I met her, she would tell me the stories, that were currently happening to her.
Okay.
At night, she would go to sleep and she would visit with the dead people. This was her family. She didn't feel like any kind of fear or anything like this. She had lost a son. There was a lot of death in those years.
Yes.
And she'd different people, and she would speak to them. She'd tell me who would come to visit. They'd come to visit her, the dead spirits, and she would talk to them and say how they were doing. And this seemed sort of like normal to me. I don't know, just
yes, I know. Yeah.
I was a little girl, and I never thought anything like she was weird or it was scary or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then my father, her first son, noticed that he had comments from some of his friends from the Theosophical Society that I might tend to be more of a spiritual type child. And he never anytime I told him about any of the things that would happen to me, a dream, or like when I told him his father was going to die, and he said, "How do you know he's going to die?" I said, "I don't know. I just know he's going to die." And he's yelling
Yes.
on the phone, "How do you know? How do you know?" I said, "I don't know." He was in California and I was in New York, so he had to fly back when all of a sudden they rushed my grandfather and said, he had massive cancer and he's going to die. My father back home from California back to New York because we lived in California at the time. I was having to be visiting my grandfather when I saw that. So he never discouraged me on any of these things. And in fact, when he was the one who paid for me to do the mind dynamics course, and he was very proud of me there and the amount of abilities that I was able to so easily work with. And he also was reading a lot of spiritual books in those times, and he was doing a lot of spiritual research. We lived in a vegan commune. There was we had a Hindu monk that lived with us. So
wow.
Doing yoga and meditation and different, a lot of fasting, which also can bring on spiritual and experiences. But I think the biggest experience my father ever had in his life, which changed his life, is he was in a federal penitentiary in prison on a stealing car thing that had happened, but it ended up in federal. And he was in solitary confinement. And when he was in a solitary confinement, he experienced, and I actually have, just because of my podcast shows and interviewing other people, have heard a similar spiritual story. Yes. And I'd never heard anyone but my father say this story. That's why it's so important we get out there and share this with other people.
Exactly.
He said he was an atheist and he raised us as atheists. So he was not, a religious Jew like his parents had been. 3 wise men came into his cell and showed him, like in a movie, what his life as a criminal would be should he choose to take or accept the offers he was getting, because he was meeting some of the most famous gangsters in federal penitentiary. He met with, what was his name? Costello.
Yes.
So they shared eggs together and breakfast and and then people were offering him jobs, like, when you get out, would you come work for me?
Exactly. Yeah.
And when he had this 3 wise men experience, and he said, "I'm looking here, I'm in a locked cell. How could anyone enter my cell? 3 men are standing there with long beards. They look like the 3 wise men." And they show him his life to a point of realizing that in that moment, he had to change his path and leave the car thieving life and go on the straight and narrow and lead a different life. So there's an experience where spirituality affected him in such a deep way. So that's the kind of father I had. So I don't feel like he did anything to ever squash anything that ever happened to me or I experienced. He might say over and over again, "What do you mean?"
Yes. Yeah. What do you mean he's going to die? He wanted to know how you knew that, I guess, right?
Yes. And he also gave me his guidance on how I should conduct myself, knowing that, like some people call these things gifts or whatever. I don't think of it that way. I always feel like whenever it happens, it's always like a special surprise, and I'm grateful. But I never expect that I'm always like this, or these things are going to always happen to me. I don't know. Each day, maybe this is with you, for your lifetime. So far, that's what I've experienced. And there's times where it's like a roller coaster, where there's times where you have so much intuitive and information coming in that's unbelievable, and other times where it feels like nothing will ever happen. You can't really perceive anything. You're not getting any gut feelings.
Where is it? Where did it go? Right?
It kind of comes in, there's times where our energy maybe not, you may not have enough of it to deal with those things. It's hard to know, but I'm just saying it's not like 24/7 you're like this. No. Or maybe you are saying I'm not.
No, it comes and goes, and depends on who I'm speaking with, what I'm doing that day. And sometimes I'll go for days and I'm like, have I lost that ability? One of the things that comes across me sometimes comes across my gut, and it's something really good's going to happen. But I don't know what it is, but I know something good's going to happen. And of course, when you're busy you don't write these things down so you find out what did happen. So you have to actually train yourself to accept it, recognize it, look for it. You're almost like an investigator at times, but even to record. I find one of the biggest things is just record those feelings so that you can draw a line to them, right? When it happens.
Your dreams, because often we don't know what the dream. I had cancer in my 30s, cervical cancer, and I was doing this 10-day silent meditation retreat with Joseph Goldstein in Hawaii. It was a Vipassana retreat.
Yes.
I'd done one-day meditations, but the idea of being silent with my big New York Jewish mouth, I couldn't imagine. So that was the most powerful thing I'd ever done. But the dreams that I had during it, I was remembering like 8 dreams, not one dream or a dream every couple of days. Every night was filled with dreams.
Wow.
They weren't making sense at that time necessarily. But when I look back on that journal, I could see where they related to working on healing the cancer. But I couldn't understand then what was going on, what the symbols meant or why did I feel. So, to any of your listeners, don't even wonder what the reason is. Just write it down. Just jot down a few little notes about something you might feel in your gut or some dream you might have. And just keep, you don't have to write a whole journal, just write, and it'll be something you might refer to later and say, that's what it was.
Yes. And I find that the more you, like you say, grateful, the more grateful you are for these things that come to you, the more they seem to come.
I always say you step out of the way and the things can come through. It's when I get in the way with my logic or skepticisms or any of those things, thinking, oh no. And then later I say, see, you knew and you didn't listen to yourself.
Exactly.
And also, the more you honor your inner voice and your inner being, the stronger the voice becomes, I feel also. That it's not as quiet inside. You start hearing your inner voice louder or your higher self, or I'm not sure what name you want to put on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that, before I published my book, Gail, I had to garner up some courage because a lot of people don't want to talk about these types of abilities. They don't want you to know about them. And people who don't have these abilities, and there are groups of people who don't have these abilities, they might feel that you can read their mind or things about them that they would wish that you just didn't know about them. But that's not true. These things that come to you, unless you read people, people say, well, if you know that, then why can't you tell me about this? Well, no, I can't tell you about that because I have no connection to that. I don't have, it means nothing to me. But on the
this very well, don't we?
What's that? Sorry?
We understand what you're talking about very well.
Yes. I know. And then on the other hand, I can sit with someone and have a conversation and all of a sudden something comes over me and I just start telling this person all of this stuff. And I say, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I need to tell you about. And by golly, it comes true. These things that I tell them comes true. And I've only done it. It's only happened a few times to me, but it's incredible. And, one of the things you said is you get out of your own way. You just become a conduit of these energies or these messages that come to you. Is that how it feels with you, or?
You described it beautifully. And one of the samples I have has always been my brother-in-law, who's watched me since I'm a teenager do the medical diagnosis and all of the different things that have happened through the years. And in fact, he's been the sweetest guy because now he's my Cisco and Ebert and he watches my podcasts and gives me reviews.
Nice.
And, he's as skeptical as they come. So it's just an excellent person. So he always says to me, well, I'll only believe you if you could tell me exactly how much change is in my pocket. So it doesn't matter that I might have just said, this and this is going to happen, and then it does. None of those things matter. He just wants to know how much change, and then he will believe me.
That is funny.
I've gotten over it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have to prove anything, you know?
Yeah, no, that's right. What a funny guy. So I'd like to ask you about the Gonsfield experiment that you did with somebody that we both know is Dean Radin.
Yes. In fact, the experiment was written in his book, Supernormal.
Yes.
The chapter on telepathy. And it doesn't say Gail Hayssen, it just says Gail, but I am that Gail.
Wonderful.
It clinks back to something we were just talking about, and I almost interrupted to say this, so I was glad I wanted to wait for the questions. Exactly what you were saying. We were talking about how one day you were feeling like for 2 or 3 days nothing was happening, and maybe nothing was going to happen for you.
Mm-hmm.
When my dad passed away, who I had the deepest, connection with.
Yeah.
First off, before he passed away, I was driving around for like a year, breaking down, crying. And my father was healthy as an ox then, running around. He did lift weights. Health was his most important thing. So it's not like we're talking about a man who's taking pharmaceutical drugs or any kind of.
Yeah.
Talking about a man who'd been a vegetarian for 40 years, that was only into health, only fasted, never saw a doctor in the 60 years of the lifetime I'd been with him.
Right.
And he, I just felt like he was going to die, and it wasn't even a thought. My physical body would get overwhelmed with emotion while I'd be driving the car. It often happened when I was driving, because I think that's when I'm in my most relaxed meditative state. Mm-hmm. And I just pull over and let all this emotion come out, and then I'd be fine again. And there was no information to be based to have this kind of deep emotional, coming apart.
Okay.
And I didn't want to tell him about it, because I felt like all these other times when I knew death was coming, I've always been correct. And I didn't want to think that this could possibly be happening. And the man was healthy as could be.
Right.
Well, sure enough, I won't go into it. It's a very long story, but he ended up where we had to bring him to a hospital because he had collapsed, and he had never been to a doctor. We had no medical anythings about him. Mm-hmm. And they said he had intestinal cancer blocking, and he needed to have surgery immediately. And he lived 3 years after this, managing his cancer and all this. And I had said to him, Dad, I was feeling the coming of your death, and I was wondering if I should share that with you. And he said, no. He said, you should never tell another person when their death is coming. It's for them to discover and experience it themselves. Okay. And I had never told him in the dying bed that I'd been carrying this feeling for so long.
Yeah. Hard to keep that in, Gail.
Yes.
Hard to keep that to yourself, right?
And the one other teaching I meant to share with you earlier was that he had always told me, you never take money for these gifts that you have.
Okay.
To you from the universe, he'd say, mm-hmm. and give them freely, because they're not really from you. They're just coming through you. Yes. And I always valued that advice since I was a teenager, and it's been my rule since. I'm sure I could have done things to charge money and do things, but I will not do that. Any experiments I'm in, I do them all voluntarily.
Right.
And anyway, so this lays up to the Gonsfield experiment.
Yes.
Because when my dad died, I was taking care of him, all of us kids, 5 of us, 24/7. No one else took care of him but the 5 of us and my mother. And it was round the clock for 2 months, and then he passed because the rest of his body was so healthy, he couldn't die. Yes. So we had to wait for the cancer to take over. And it took everything out of me. And Dean called me up, and it had been 1 year since he had died. Mm-hmm. Dean called me up and said, come down. I have an experiment here at Ions I want you to try called the Gonsfield. And I said, oh, I always wanted to, no, this was the, Gonsfield was separate. I'm sorry. This was the double slit experiment.
The double slit. Okay, let's talk about that.
I got to do Gonsfield next.
Okay.
And he said, I want to try this double split experiment. It had to do with taking your mind and interfering with beams that were generated from a special expensive device that's thousands of dollars. And you're interfering with your mind to stop the photons. So it's an actual effect that's going on in the machine, and it shows on the computer on the screen, because you're all hooked up to all these things to show what's going on.
Right.
Well, I said, all right, I'll agree to do this. I said, but I don't have any mojo anymore, and I can't do anything psychic. And I after my dad died, it's a year now, but I have nothing left.
Right.
He said, my husband said, just go, you'll see, just go. I know you were ready, just go.
Yeah.
And I said, Dean, I don't think I'm, whatever. And he hooks me up to the machine, and I'm thinking about my dad. And all of a sudden, and excuse my audience words, but I just said to the machine, I'm just going to blow the whole fucking thing up.
Oh,
And I said that, and I'm locked in the Faraday cage in pitch black. Everything is pitch black, because I wasn't in pitch black, but it turned pitch black.
okay.
So I did something bad in the Faraday cage, and I somehow did something to the equipment.
Okay.
Dean comes in to let me know that there was no electricity through the entire IONS campus, around everywhere. For that 1 30-second or whatever it was, there was no electricity. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was a sunny, beautiful day. There was no wind. All their stuff is underground. So he called it an anomaly and said, you affected this machine. I wished we could have gotten the data, but there was no electricity to
record it.
Record it. And that was really, I just wanted to answer to the fact when you think your mojo is gone. And I thought that was forever.
Yes.
It wasn't. It came back very strong.
In a big, big way.
Big way. The second experiment we did, that's the Gonsfield one. That's the Supernormal, not the double slit. This one was hysterical. I had a contractor that I had hired to do some construction in my house and remodel my kitchen. And just like you were saying earlier, that sometimes someone comes in and you just know all these things about them and you don't know why.
Right.
That's what I had with this contractor named Tom. And Tom comes into my house. I go to give him the first week's paycheck. And he sits down and I say, I don't know you. I said, but I have to know all these things I have to tell you about your life. And I told him all these intimate things about things that had happened when he was traveling in Mexico and his child was left at a daycare. And I explained all the things that had happened. His mouth fell open. He said, no one knew this. Nobody knows this story. How do you know this story? I said, I don't know. I had no idea. I also told him things like, I know you told me you and your wife do ballroom dancing and you're in construction. I said, but I saw you like a prize fighter. I said, I'm seeing you like beating people up with fists and, this kind of stuff.
Yes.
He tells me, I can't believe you saw this. He said, I went to the Chuck Norris school of, boxing or self-defense or something. And him and his brother used to go around and, go into bars and beat people up at night, fighting, This is not the kind of man he is now, but he was talking about as a young kid,
Yeah.
So I had mentioned this to Tom and to Dean Radin, and he said, why don't you bring him in? And that's who we'll do the Gonsfield experiment with. Okay. And I'd heard about the Gonsfield because it's the most respected, proven ESP that scientists respect in the scientific community. And I'd read about it, and I think it's been around since the 70s. I'm not sure. And I just thought, I'd love to do that someday. And finally, it came into Dean's lab to do that.
Wonderful.
So we come in, and Tom has never done anything psychic or had any experiments or knows anything about any of this kind of stuff. He's just the contractor guy who does the ballroom dancing and whatever.
Right.
So, and he's never met a character like me. So Dean has him in his office, and he has Tom looking at a photo that's going to be selected on the screen. And his job is to just keep focusing on that photo and telepathically send me the message of what he's looking at. I'm in the basement at Ions, and I'm in the Faraday cage, and I'm supposed to be saying or drawing or what. No, I have ping pong balls over my eyes.
Right.
So drawing anything, and I'm in this shielded room. I've got the ping pong balls on, and they're supposed to do something about the lighting or how it affects
the red
your brain.
lighting or something. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I start telling him the image of what I see, which you can read in Supernormal. Well, for me, whenever I'm doing an experiment for Dean or Russell, I get the info within the first 20 seconds. The experiment's always supposed to last for 20 minutes.
Oh.
And I start getting bored, and then I start making up stories. I hit the nail on the head immediately. It was the Great Pyramid, which I happened to be going to 2 months after this this particular Godesfield experiment. And when I described it, Tom just figured, though, that's the end. And Dean was busy waiting for the 20 minutes to be up, so he was doing paperwork. And what Dean didn't know, and I only found out I don't know, maybe a year later, and Dean didn't find out till he was just on a podcast, on my podcast, was that after I did that, Tom just started looking around the room at all of Dean's things and not focusing on the target anymore, because he figured, well, she said it, this, and that's it. So I started to describe the things he was seeing, or for the rest of the thing, but I was describing the things in the room. Who's never done an experiment, doesn't tell us any of this. Dean sends a film group over that was from Japan, and they were doing a documentary, and they came to film me about the documentary. And I told them about this Tom and this story. And so they had Tom as part of the interview. And that was when we discovered, he said, yeah. And after she described the pyramid perfectly, she described the photos on his wall, and she was describing this thing I was looking at and that thing I was looking at. He said, but I didn't say anything. I said, you kidding?
Tom thought it was part of the experiment.
He thought that, I did the one thing. It doesn't matter the other things I'm seeing through his eyes.
Okay.
So I thought I had told Dean, but I had never told him. And so when he came on my show this year, and we were talking about that experiment and how, what was going on. And then I told him, he said, you're kidding me. I said, no, turn around. I was describing all the other things. And then when he turned to Tom and saw he wasn't looking at the computer, he said, no, you're supposed to keep focusing on the computer for 20 minutes. So anyway, it was one of many unusual psychic connective experiences I had with this gentleman, Tom. I was able to see through his eyes for whatever reason. I don't know why some people just have like this easy, and I always feel like connected. And sometimes I think if you believe in other lifetimes, or if you believe in reincarnation, which, I'm not 100% on anything, but maybe this is really true. It feels almost like I've known the person in another lifetime.
Yeah.
And like I somehow connect into them in a deep way. But where I could say, I don't know, I have no idea why that happens. But that was laboratory proof, and also proof that things for me always seem to be going on besides the experiment during the experiment.
Yes.
And I learned stuff about myself. Like I learned so many things from being a subject for these two gentlemen in their experiments. And I'm happy for whatever data and things that I was able to give them and whatever they needed for their, what they were looking for. But the things that I've learned from my own self, like I never knew that I could do precognitive remote viewing.
Right.
Until they sat down and asked me to do this. And all of a sudden I was telling them the picture that hasn't been selected yet. And it's going to be selected at 3:00. But at 1:00, I'm sitting with Russell in the office, and I'm drawing the tree and the water and the things that are in the picture, but a random number generator hasn't picked the picture yet. It has 300 National Geographic pictures to pick it from.
Right.
So that's the future. So I learned that I had that ability with them. I didn't know I could do that.
That is astounding, Gail. That's incredible. You're listening to the Rhonda Grant Show right now, whose podcast has been treated with digital audio health by my sponsor, Symatrex. And we're listening to Gail Hayssen today. And Gail, let people know where they can reach out to you on your website, and also you have a podcast I'd like you to talk about, and how they may listen to some of, or watch actually some of your podcasts on YouTube.
Well, we'd love to get some more subscribers and listeners. So any of you out there that would like to watch our podcast, it is called, it's long, so I'm going to read it to you. Our podcast is our website first is asmallmediumatlarge.co. I do know that there is another small medium at large site that another woman has, but look for the one for Gail Hayssen. And our YouTube channel is a small medium at large podcast at gmail.com. And that's also our email. So our email and podcast links seem to be the same. So you should be able to find this. And actually on the website, if you go to the website, it has all the different shows. Like I've been on Jeffrey Mishlov's New Thinking Aloud. And so all those shows, plus all the small, medium at large podcasts are all on the website. But just go to the YouTube channel. And if you just type in Gail Hayssen or small, medium at large Gail Hayssen, it'll come up right away on YouTube. We have, I think we've gotten about 16 or 17 shows now. We do a show every other Wednesday. So it's only 2 shows a month. And I'm having all sorts of interesting guests, but mostly we want to talk about intimate stories and things that help for people to heal in their own lives when they hear familiar stories that maybe might bring them comfort.
Oh, wonderful. That's excellent, Gail. Thank you. So what I like to ask my guests on the show is, what extraordinary discovery have you found in your life? And it's been so colorful that I'm sure that you have so many to talk about. But can you think of one that sort of stands out, beyond the Gonsfield experiment and the double slit experiment?
Well, I say when I've followed my dreams, I've been led to really amazing experiences. And one of them being, I had a dream that I should go to New Mexico and that there was someone I was supposed to meet there. And that was in 1987. And I met a Huichol Indian man named Miguel there. And now it's 2022. And I'm still involved with the Huichol Indians in the mountains of Mexico all of these years. And my involvement became very deep, where I went there for 6 different trips and was in a remote area in Mexico where you can only go by invitation, and not very many white little short Jewish women have been there. And I found ways to be of service to help them over the last all these years. And had I not followed that dream and followed, and there are things that another person would say, what are you, crazy? You're buying a ticket to go to New Mexico to see someone you don't even know if it exists, But I don't think of those things. When I look back at my life, I'm going to be 67 next month. I took a lot of risks and things. And as a single little 4'11" person, and I went to places and journeys and did things that I'm lucky to be alive to talk to you, to tell you about them, because things have happened that, that it was dangerous, the places I went to and things that I did. But I always somehow felt like protected by, whether it's a higher force, a spiritual guide, or something has protected me through my whole life, because I've experienced tremendous traumas, and I've gone through a lot of experiences that in some person's life, just one of those would be enough to set you off the edge.
Okay.
And I've been able to come through all of this and be somewhat of a whole person. And so I think I'm just really grateful that I didn't let shoulds stop me, or shouldn'ts stop me from doing the things that I did, because a lot of the things were were just a gut feeling or a dream or I feel like I should talk to this person. I should go to this spot right now. And things have happened from following that gut level feeling.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's such a powerful, I mean, a lot of people wish that they were more in touch so that they could feel guided and protected and all of those things. But what a powerful feeling it must be, Gail, to do the things that you've done and actually feel guided and feel protected.
Well, I feel that I've only learned this now in my more wisdom years.
When you look back, right?
Things I was never knowing how I was being protected.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing is in retrospect, you
Yes.
realize of all the things that happened. And here you are at 67 years of age, having your own podcast and talking about these things and reflecting back on your life and the things that you've done. It's astonishing. I love it.
Well, I love what you're doing and having podcasts that are bringing out these kinds of stories in people, because I think this is what we need to share more of.
I agree. Mm-hmm. It sure is. One of the other things that I like to ask my guest is, do you feel that you've been called to your journey?
I know this may sound silly, but
it doesn't. It won't.
I was initiated as a Buryat, a Mongolian yellow shaman.
Yes.
In 2011. And I felt that that was one of the most important things that gave me, I don't want to, it gave me a form, or it gave me something to be able to do the things that I've been doing, but now say I'm doing them with my shaman clothing on.
Yes.
And when I now with my shaman clothing on, I feel very protected by everything I did to be initiated as a shaman, to then continue doing the work I do with friends and family who will come to my house because they've lost a loved one. They don't feel complete. They feel like they're missing something. And we experience some forms of mediumship, or I'm not exactly sure what the words are you want to use. But when they come to me, we make a connection. And we do something together that I don't have words for, that's in the invisible. And when they leave, between all we've done is sound and welcoming in spirit, we seem to have a very positive experience together. And the person will then leave feeling like better or lighter, and you can see it in their face.
Mm-hmm.
Any way that I could do that kind of service or help, or for me, it's often usually around death a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be there with the person, or I make prayer candles when people have died for their family, so that they would have a way to connect with their family by lighting that candle. And I tell them, I put a lot of energy into the candle itself, and I give it to them to have as their altar. And I found that a lot of people don't even realize sometimes when they've lost a loved one, that setting up an altar in their house with, whether it's their ashes sitting there, a piece of their clothing or an item of theirs, or however you do it with flowers and
Mm-hmm.
things, how important that is in the healing and in the grieving process. So these are things that I just offer to do. That's nothing to do with monies, or, I don't have a sign out, or I don't say,
no,
come to me problems,
It's, no.
It's where if there's somebody hurt or they need something, if I'm there, I want to be able to help in whatever way I can. And sometimes you do have to help somebody with money or a thing or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Be able to help other people. And that's why I'm hoping these podcasts somehow, I always say, if just one person listens and gets something out of it, or finds someone else that helps them that they've seen as a guest or whatever, this is like a chain of things that's going along, a ripple in the pond, whatever, that it's helping another person.
Mm-hmm. And it's almost like, and someone that I have interviewed on my podcast is, He said, it's as though you are providing a portal for people to share their lives, their stories, and to help others. And I love that. I thought that makes so much sense to me, because you, just like myself, I just happened into being a podcaster. I never thought about it. I never dreamt about it. I didn't know anything about it. And I was asked to be a podcaster. And I was like, what, I had to learn about it. I had to learn the craft and the skill. And my podcast, I think I'm at my 47th show, or 48th. You'll probably actually be my 49th or 50th podcast that I've done in a year. I try and do them once a week. And for some reason, I keep on coming back to it, that's what I want to do. I feel that I'm providing a service. I don't know what it is. We may never know what it is unless our listeners let us know. But the fact that you are on YouTube and you can count your subscribers and know the people that are your followers, that's fantastic. My show is actually going to be going up on YouTube within the month. All my episodes are going to be there. So I'm anxious to see.
Well, some people, like when I was talking to some people, they don't have time to like watch a YouTube.
Right.
So really audio is really what I think is the most popular form, because people are working or they're busy and they're out in their garden and they're listening to the podcast at the same time.
Yes.
The thing that I like about the YouTubes is when I was just like on Jeffrey's show, or when I've been a guest on other people's show, is I can then share the actual photos of the things that we're talking about or the people.
Yes.
So that's the only difference I find in, you get to see the faces, but when you're sharing things for them to see, that's like what a Huichol ceremony looks like, or
right.
That you're hearing it, but when you see the picture, it really is amazing to see the photos.
Yes. Or your what do you call that? Your harp that you have.
Yes, the jaw
right.
harp.
And you can play it. And
yes.
And I've seen people play the flute on Buddha at the gas pump. And so and the eye is a window to the brain. It resonates with you. It anchors you to
it's a good, it's another form. And so these, so I don't really have the other sort of shamanic thing that I had just done actually this week was it was my mother's 95th birthday.
Wow.
And sisters came from New York and everybody came. And I have had this thing that some people think is strange, but I think is a beautiful thing, which is every one of my nieces, I don't have any grandchildren yet. So every one of my nieces, when they've had a child, I've asked them for their placenta from their birth.
Oh.
Tell them that, and that they thought Auntie Gail was a little crazy. they love Auntie Gail. And
yes.
And placentas were all over the country. So they weren't here at my house. They had to fly them to me.
Right.
Or bring them manually, whichever way. And then I keep them in the freezer until they arrive. And so I'd had this, I have 8 of them now. And we've planted 7 trees. And each child's placenta, I do a ceremony and I wait. That's why I keep it in the freezer until the child can actually be there for the planting of the tree.
Wow.
And sometimes put on my shamanic clothing. Sometimes I don't, but I use sound. And this little 3-year-old Eli, our latest one, he was born right before COVID. I was sent the placenta. I have it in the freezer. I'm waiting for him to come. This child loved this ceremony. He loved the planting of the tree.
Yes.
When I special music and sound and did it around his body, he just stood there like this and closed his eyes like he was taking it in, like a little Buddha.
Yes, like a little Buddha, yes.
and he's half Asian. And we were putting the dirt in, and it's a peach tree. And then I have a pottery studio because I make pottery. So I make a sign for each child with the year that they were born and their name. And then I put it under each tree in a plaque. So now this is the 8th tree, and the kids are some of them are 10 years old now, and they're taking the fruit off their own tree that's theirs. And
that's fantastic.
Yeah, I've been here for 45 years, so I'm dying here. I'm not going.
Yeah, you're not going anywhere.
Exactly.
Yes.
My ashes will be fertilizing some future fruit tree.
Yeah. Well, Gail, it's just been such a pleasure to have you on the show. You have so much to share that, I'm offering you an invitation to come back again, because I'd love to hear more about you and the other journeys that you've had. I mean, you've had such a rich existence, and there's lots more for you to talk about.
Well, I would be more than thrilled to come back. I love coming on shows with people like you. And in the same vein, I would like to have you on my podcast show, because I'd like to talk about the book and the next book you have coming, because I think the audience would love to hear this. And, each of us has different audiences to reach.
Exactly.
The more we do, the more we'll get our words out to other people.
Yes. Thank you so much, Gail. Theme song for the Rhonda Grant Show, Sun on the Water, is composed and performed by my friend John Park Wheeler. This is Rhonda Grant with the Rhonda Grant Show, author of Magical Forces Within, Extraordinary Discoveries in an Ordinary Life, inviting you to look for the magical forces within yourself today and every day. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rhonda Grant Show with your host, Rhonda Grant. If you would like to find out more information about Rhonda and her upcoming guests and the work that she does, go to her website, rhondagrantauthor.com. That's rhondagrantauthor.com.
Digital Audio Health by Cymatrax.